Good morning, everyone. I'm Chris Eastwood, Chairman of the Board of Directors for the Danville Regional Foundation, and on behalf of our board, it's my pleasure to welcome you here this morning. We all know that there's been a great deal of discussion recently about a possible casino and entertainment complex coming to our community. Given this possibility, the DRF board desired to know what the range of impacts may be of such a complex coming to our region, both economically and socially. It was the decision of the board to commission an independent study to examine these possible effects. In May, we contracted with Fourth Economy Consulting from Pittsburgh to conduct this study and provide a comprehensive report to our entire community. We gathered this morning to hear the findings of their research. To be clear, DRF is not taking a position on the development of a casino complex in Danville. We simply felt it was important to provide as much information as possible to our community. It is our hope the findings produced by Fourth Economy will help all residents have a better understanding of any future potential development. I'd now like to introduce DRF President and CEO Clark Casteel.
Well, thank you, Chris, and good morning, everyone. We're going to spend about 45 minutes or so hearing about comparative research and logic models and doing a deep dive on data, which I guess when you put it that way doesn't really sound like a great way to start your morning. But from our perspective, this is an important issue, as Chris said, for the region, and we do appreciate everybody coming out today. The board at DRF wanted to understand how something as large and complex as a casino development could have on this community, and they established a special committee of our board members and tasked that committee to facilitate this study. The committee received 14 proposals to conduct this research and ultimately decided to contract with Fourth Economy, in part because they had no past casino clients and had never worked on a casino study before. This may have put them at a disadvantage on the front end because this is a complex industry, and they had some learning and catching up to do. But we thought it important to have a group that had not previously taken a pro or con position on the subject. We asked them to provide us with an unbiased report and show us a range of potential impacts, and in our first glance at the report, we think they've succeeded. We expect that both advocates and opponents are going to find pieces of this study to argue with or argue against. But at the end of the day, we believe this report as a whole will allow all of us to ask more and better questions on this subject than we came in here with. Joining us today is Dr. Jerry Paytas, Vice President of Research and Analytics at Fourth Economy. His team has done an amazing amount of work in just 6 months, and we want to thank them for their diligence. After Dr. Paytas concludes his presentation, Martha Walker, DF Board Member and Casino Study Chair, will facilitate a question and answer session given the time we've got remaining. Thank you again for being here today, and I now introduce Dr. Jerry Paytas.
All right, good morning. I hope everyone has had enough time to have their coffee and get warmed up. I want to thank Clark for the introduction, and it's been great working with the folks at the Danville Regional Foundation. They've been a great client to work with, really helpful in giving us feedback on our work, very critical feedback, very important feedback. Economic development contains a lot of uncertainty. Every economic development project is a risk. That's part of the job, is taking that risk. And it's really important, as Clark said and Chris said, to understand what those risks are. What are the risks? What are the rewards? So you can make an informed decision. A lot is going to happen between now and when any facility opens. A lot of decision points are going to come along the way. And if you understand what the risks are and what the rewards are, you can better manage them so that you get good outcomes versus bad outcomes. And I hope at the end of the day, you'll have a better understanding of what some of those are. I think we've already sort of covered the background of the study. We were asked to be neutral. We were asked to be objective. And we were asked to look at the broad range of impacts, economic and social impacts. We weren't asked to be positive. We weren't asked to be negative. We were asked to present things as objectively and factually as possible. Now, in doing this study, we did a literature review. We looked at a set of benchmark communities. We looked at communities all across the country that had casinos, and we identified a set of benchmark communities. We conducted interviews in Danville. We conducted interviews in those benchmark communities. We analyzed a lot of data, and we ultimately estimated the economic impacts, and we also did research on the social impacts. And we're going to present all of those findings today. So a little bit about fourth economy. As Clark said, we have not taken a position pro or for any casino. We have worked in a number of communities that have casinos where a casino was a part of the economic development strategy. Our firm is an economic and community development strategy firm. So that is core of what we do, is understanding what's happening in the economy of a city, of a region, of a state. What are the drivers? What are the positives, negatives? How do you achieve the best possible outcome and future? We take a systems perspective to that so that we understand how all the various parts work together. It's not just about what industry, whether it's casino or auto manufacturing or whatever. Every industry has its pros and cons. How is that going to fit in with your housing market? How is that going to fit in with your roads and your transportation network? How does that fit in with your educational system and your workforce and training system? So while we are not casino experts, I say we are systems experts. And we understand how those systems work, and that was why we were brought together. We do a lot of evaluation work, program evaluations. We do a lot of impact studies. We do feasibility studies. But the core of our firm is that economic development strategy. So this is our core project team. There was a lot of other pinch hitters involved in this, but I can only fit 4 pictures on the slide, so these are the folks who get credit. I'm the principal in charge. Chris Worley, who's actually here with me today, was one of our consulting analysts who worked on the economic and the tax impacts. Joshua Devine worked on the social impacts. And Monica Hirschberger, who does our design and communications, makes everything I do actually look professional and not sloppy. So first, I'm going to go and talk a little bit about some of the assumptions behind our study that undergird some of the methodology, because a lot is unknown at this point. You don't have an operator, you don't have a site. There's a lot of things we don't know what the tax rate's going to be. So a lot of assumptions had to be made, and we want to lay those out. And then we're going to go through the key findings around the 6 topic areas that we were asked to look at. Taxes and revenues. That's one of the big drivers for every community that's looking for a casino, is how much tax dollars is it going to generate? Then it was also the job creation. And then what's the quality of those jobs? What other development impacts? What are the spillover impacts on the surrounding area? How will this impact tourism? And then what are the social impacts? So starting, and we actually started our work in June, at which time, there was a lot more unknown. We still don't know what the state tax rate will be, but SB 1706 had laid out a 10% tax rate. Some people were talking about a 15% tax rate. So we modeled our taxes at 10 and 15% gaming taxes, and then we also looked at related non-gaming taxes that would be generated. In the benchmark states that we analyzed, the state tax rates ranged from 23 to 47%. So that 10 to 15% was lower than what we're seeing in the benchmark states, and now lower than what has come out in the JLARC report. Although they have also not recommended any gaming taxes, 0% to the local host community. Our scenario estimates gaming taxes to the local host community. Another key assumption is how successful will the casino be? How much revenue is it going to generate? How many visitors will it attract? So for that, we took a look at the experience of the benchmark communities and saw a range of impacts. So we have a low end of 50 million, and we had a high end of 300 million, reflecting the experience of some of these different casino communities. Now, the low end, that could be a steady state. That could be there are casinos that operate out there that are at that $30 to $50 million range. That could also reflect the initial years of operation. The most successful casino isn't going to open its doors and in the first year bring in $300 million. So 50 million might be year one, or it could be a little more. So we also did that because we thought that gives us a reasonable starting point to see, if this gets off the ground, how is it going to build up? What could it build to? And we looked at that higher end of 300 million. So these were the benchmark areas that we looked at. Shelbyville, Indiana. And we chose these because they had some similarities to Danville and some differences. They all had casinos. They had different operators. So in Shelbyville, we had, it's operated by Caesars, although Caesars has now been bought by Eldorado. St. Joe is Affinity Gaming. Charlestown is a Hollywood casino. Monticello is run by Empire Resorts. Dubuque we chose because they had two casinos, one which is city-owned, which was interesting, and the other one, the Diamond Joe, is from another one called Boyd Gaming. And so we had a range of operators from the large national operators to smaller regional operators and mid-level operators. So that would also give us a range of how might that affect what could happen here. So how do these benchmark communities compare? This was the range of revenues across the board. So we had the low of 30 million in Monticello, going up to a high of 336 million at the Charlestown Casino. Our estimate was for Danville to be in that 50 to 300 million, so we kind of stayed a little bit lower than what we saw in the Charlestown. When we look across these benchmark casinos, and you look at the population within that 100-mile area, Danville is about in the middle of the pack. The Charlestown Casino with 336 million, there's almost 12 million people within 100 miles. They're able to tap the DC market. They've been very successful. But if we look at the Monticello Casino, they've got New York City within 100 miles, 24 million people, and they've been going along at 30 million. And that casino is now closed because Empire Resorts opened a new casino outside Monticello. So Monticello actually no longer gets any tax revenue from their casino. So this gave us a lot of range of experience to look at and to see how these different conditions might affect what could happen here. So just looking at our assumptions, at the time we were doing our study, there was one other study that was out. That was a study done from the Bristol group by Chimera Economics and Analytics. And they had looked at a $600 million casino. And then when you add in the non-gaming revenues, it would be about an $890 million casino. We sort of felt that took the best case possible scenario. I'm not sure it's very likely, but we did not model that scenario because that had been done. So we were looking at what do we think is a more realistic set of expectations, and that's where we have the 50 and the $300 million casino. So to achieve that level at the small end, the $50 million casino, that's 180,000 to 367,000 visitors a year, 500 to 1,000 people a day coming to the casino. At our high end, we're looking at 3,000 to 6,000 visitors per day coming into the casino. And for that Bristol study, that'd be 11,000 visitors a day to hit that $890 million range. So on the low end, our estimated impact would be 575 jobs, and that's the direct employment for the casino and the hotel and the restaurant that would all be on site, and 3,050 jobs on the high end. The Bristol study put it at 54 and change. So then our total estimated tax revenue range from 3.2 to 9.1. That's the gaming taxes plus all the non-gaming taxes. The Bristol study was 20.3 million. The other recent studies from the city and JLARC are much closer to where our estimates are than the Bristol estimate. So I feel pretty good about where we came out with that. So whether or not you're going to achieve a $50 million casino or a $300 million casino, you got to draw people in, on that daily basis. Are you going to get 1,000, 500, 6,000 people a day coming in? What's the market share you have to achieve for that to happen? So if we look at the share of adults within the 100 miles of the casino, which is going to be the core draw area, be very easy to get a $50 million casino. If people are spending $150 a visit, you'd only need 8% of the people to come to the casino. That's very feasible, that's very achievable. But if people are only spending $150 to get to that $300 million casino, you'd have to get almost half the people coming into the casino, or drawing a lot more from outside 100 miles. And you need a tourism strategy and other things to make all that happen. Now, if people are spending $300 a day, you only need a quarter of the market to capture. Or you need a lot of people who are, who gamble more frequently. So it might not be 24% of everybody, it might be a small percentage who come multiple times, that they're back and forth and back and forth. But Gallup reports about 26% of Americans gambled in the last year, so we feel that any number below that 26%, highly feasible. But also when we look at what's going to happen, how long can you draw that market in? Within that 100 miles, Danville doesn't have sole access to all that market. The casino in Bristol will compete, and the casinos in the north will compete. In Richmond and Portsmouth will compete for that Virginia market and for portions of the North Carolina market. This casino would be most reliant on that North Carolina market. Most of that population is going to be coming up from North Carolina. Will North Carolina maintain those roads, and will you have roads that can handle the tour buses and draw all those people up here? Will the other communities leading up to Danville keep their roads up so you can get all that traffic in here? That's a key question. We also don't know what the gambling age is going to be that the legislature will set. Is it going to be 18 or is it going to be 21? There have been different proposed legislation out there that set the rate at 18, but most of them are setting them at 21. We based our assumptions on a gambling age of 18, so if it's 21, that's going to be a smaller market. The other risk is whether or not North Carolina legalizes casino gaming. They've been legalizing other forms of gaming. A lot of things about the state would suggest that it's not likely that they're going to add casinos, but it's been happening in a lot more places. So you have access to this market until North Carolina legalizes their casinos. If they do legalize, it could drop your share of the market by 30 to 50%, which would make it much tougher to sustain that higher level casino. And a core question is, not just how big the benefits will be, but where are they distributed? Who benefits? And then where do the costs fall? So on the low end, and we base this based off of a distribution proposed in SB 1706. We don't know that that's going to be what comes out. The JLARC study is saying the state keeps 100% of the gaming revenues and the host community only gets the non-gaming revenues. But if they follow this distribution, the state got a portion. They gave a portion to the transportation district, which would help pay for those roads coming in and out. And I'll also say that once you get this kind of money on the table, every community is going to be trying for a piece of the pie from the state. They're all going to be asking for it. But based on that distribution, on the low end, Danville would get, for that $50 million casino, $625,000 in annual gaming revenues. Now the other taxes would be $2.6 million. The sales, the real estate, we'll go into that in a minute. On a high end, Danville would get $5.6 million plus another $3.5 in the other taxes. So when you think about how this would compare to the benchmark casinos, is this a fair rate? A lot of states, the host communities get 1 to 2% of the revenues. That's nationally. And across our benchmarks, that also bore out. Most of the communities were getting a 1 to 2% rate. Based on the distributions we used, we had put Danville at somewhere between the 1.3 and 1.9%. So that would be about in line with what some other communities are getting. Now, if they go and say you get 0 of the gaming taxes, you'd be well below what other host communities are getting. The one outlier here is the Dubuque, where they have that 6.9%. That includes the money that the city gets from their ownership of the casino, not just the taxes. So they're a totally different, they have that casino owned by the city, which we think it's the only publicly owned casino other than like the tribal casinos, the only city-owned casino in the country. So in terms of the non-gaming revenues, I mean, the bulk of the revenue to Danville would come from the real estate investment. So the legislation specified a minimum $200 million investment. So we modeled the investments from 220 to 264 million, scaling up from the low end to the high end. Then another big chunk of that is the business personal property tax that comes off the furnishings, fixtures, and equipment that go into the casino. Then there's the meals taxes, lodging tax, sales tax. We also made an estimate of tax diversion and offset. So that's how much might be sales that are lost to other businesses. And studies suggest that ranges from 30% to 75%. So in the end, even including that diversion, it didn't really make that much of a difference, even at that 75% level. So this is where we get to our related taxes of 2.6 and 3.5 million. But the bulk of it coming from real estate. So the jobs that are going to be created, casino will create quite a number of jobs. We don't know exactly what wage they're going to pay. The national average wage is $15.75 per hour in the casino industry, but 2/3 of the workers earn less than $15 an hour. So in Danville, a living wage for one adult, one child household would be $24 an hour. So these will be, most of the jobs there will be just below a living wage. And casinos are 24/7 operations. So if you're working at the casino, you might be working late at night, early morning. There's going to have to be daycare options in Danville that operate on that 24-hour schedule for a lot of workers to be able to take those jobs. And those options don't exist right now. But these are better jobs than in the hotel and accommodation industry in Danville. That $15 an hour is more than what's paid in for those similar jobs in the rest of Danville. So for those workers, that's a nice bump in their paycheck. But it could also require existing businesses to pay more to compete for those workers, and it may compete for workers in some other industries. So first, if we take a look at what does that distribution look like, this is the national data on the wages by occupation in the casino and gaming industry. The bulk of the workers, the service workers, 29% of the workforce, and the food preparation and serving workers, 21% of the workforce, going to be making $14 an hour and about $13 an hour respectively. So well below the national average. Now, wages in Danville are a little lower than the national average. When we look at the benchmark communities, you know, some of them, the New York casinos pay above the national average. The West Virginia casinos pay below the national average. So whether or not they're going to pay that $15.75, you know, that's unknown. It could be lower. So if we look at how this might compare to what some other options are, and I say, hey, this could be good job. This is good jobs for some people, depending on what they're making. You know, at that $13 an hour for the food service, that's a pretty common entry-level wage for a lot of different jobs. So that's not too bad. Still below the benchmark average for the gambling industry, but well above what people make in accommodation and recreation. was just under $11 an hour. And in Danville, it's just only $8 an hour, a little higher than the minimum wage. That would be good jobs for those workers, but below the average for Danville and below that living wage level. If they get into the wages that are higher, at that $22, that could compete for workers who might be looking at manufacturing. Now on the social impacts. One possible impact is crime. Now, we are not trying to predict crime. I want to be very clear that this is not a prediction of what can happen. We're looking at a range of possible outcomes. Crime could go down. In the Charlestown area, the Hollywood Casino has a lower crime rate than the surrounding communities. I can't say that it has a lower crime rate because of the casino, I can just say that it does. But in most other casino communities, the crime rate is higher. There's only been one national study that looked at casinos all across the study. It is old, but they looked at a 20-year time period. They looked across the entire United States from 1977 to 1996, and they found that 8% of crime in casino counties was attributable to the casinos. A lot of time has passed. Police have better technology. They know how to do things better. So maybe that's an overestimate. But I've also noticed criminals have also gotten more sophisticated and developed new methods. So that game is always playing out. So we can't predict what's going to happen. This study has been criticized by a lot of folks using various case studies and showing in this community crime was not impacted, in that community crime wasn't impacted. A couple of case studies don't outweigh the findings of a large national study. And in 20 years, no critic has replicated the time frame or scale of this study. So I can't say that there's going to be an 8% increase in crime. What we're saying is crime could increase. This is a risk, and you need to be prepared if it happens. You need to be able to say that, will this generate enough benefits and enough revenue that this is okay? Now, a lot of this crime is just related to any attraction you do, anything you do that would bring in 6,000 visitors a day is going to increase your crime. But casinos are still a little different because most of those other attractions don't have those visitors leaving with cash in their pockets. And the legislature hasn't set a limit on how much the casino can pay out in cash, but in some states that's $20,000 or more. Some states limit it to $5,000. That's different than having an amusement park or some other type of attraction in your community. Another social impact is problem gambling. Now, national studies have put the rate of problem gambling at just under 3%, and that's what we were using in our estimate to say that could impact 2,200 local residents. And that would be an estimated annual social cost of $1.3 million in Danville and $1.9 million in Pennsylvania. And that's driven by the number of residents that could be impacted in those communities. This is what we call a social cost, though. This isn't a line item that comes out of the city's budget or Pennsylvania County's budget. It's a social cost that is borne by the individual, their family, their employer, their neighbors, the community. So it's not something, that comes out of somebody's line item, but it is something that needs to be funded and managed and prepared for. Now, in most states, these programs are a state responsibility, and they're managed by the state. And that makes a lot of sense because you don't want to have it be a local responsibility because someone could go and, they have a problem in the Danville casino and then they just go over to the Bristol casino and the Bristol folks don't know anything about that. And then they go to the Richmond casino. So it has to be managed at a state level. And if the state's going to keep all the revenue, they should certainly be managing that funding. It shouldn't be a local responsibility. So I said earlier, there's a lot of unknowns about what could drive this impact. All the development decisions that are coming up are going to impact what happens here. And in the benchmark communities we looked at, we saw a range of experience based on who the operators were, how they partnered with local businesses, how the casino fit into the region's tourism strategy, did the region really have a tourism strategy and a broader platform of amenities to attract visitors and get them into the community outside of the casino? Some cases they did, in some cases they didn't. And that impacts whether or not the patrons are primarily local or whether you get people from farther and wider away. Then it also matters where the casino is located and how it's set up. Is it isolated? Is it all-inclusive? Come in the door, spend all your money here, don't look outside, and don't go visit any other business in Danville. If it's that isolated and all-inclusive, it's not going to generate positive spillovers. Or you have some of the casinos that are more embedded into a district where they do have relationships with the existing businesses, and in some cases they have partnerships. They might, serve somebody's food in their restaurant. They might have other vendors they work with. There can be positive spillovers. So it's going to come down to a whole series of decisions that get made between now and then of whether or not you get the kind of facility that's going to be a positive on the community or a negative. The impacts are very mixed. The casino is not a silver bullet. So you'll be glad to know I'm into the wrap-up phase now. What if Danville bets on a casino? As you said, there's a lot of unknowns here. How big will it be? Will you be able to attract all the people to support a $50 million casino or a $300 million casino? How long will you be able to sustain a casino at $300 million if North Carolina legalizes? You will get some jobs. Could be 500, some jobs could be 3,000. And there's going to be wages. Not all those jobs, though, will go to Danville residents. They'll go to folks outside of Danville. There will be people commuting in for those jobs. So some of those benefits are going to flow to those other communities. A lot of taxes are going to be generated. But it is a very open question right now as to where those tax dollars are going to flow. The way we looked at it, the state was going to get the bulk of the benefit off the gaming taxes, and Danville was going to get much less. And that certainly is the case across the U.S. The states always get the bulk of the revenue. The host communities get less. So we think this is probably pretty reasonable, but we don't know what's going to happen because the legislation has not yet been passed. But we do know that some of the impacts are going to fall on the host community and on the nearby communities. So where the crime occurs, that'll be an impact. We can't predict what's going to happen, but it's going to be those jurisdictions that have to pay for that. Now, in some states, and in the state of Missouri, the state police patrols every casino. They get the bulk of the revenue, but they have taken the burden of policing those casinos off of the local host community. So that's an option that should be asked about. And then problem gambling. As I said before, that too is generally a state responsibility, but the state needs to make sure they put aside enough money to fund that statewide and that they have an effective statewide program. It can't be isolated into each individual casino. And then there will be jobs created. Pretty good jobs. Jobs will be better for some, but they're not quite going to be living wage jobs. So there's a bit of a mixed impact there. As you move forward with this, this is the biggest bet on Danville's future. There's a lot of uncertainties and a lot of risks. It could turn out really well. It could turn out really badly. And I hope that what we've been able to do today is give you a better understanding of what some of those risks and opportunities are so that you're prepared to decide which one of these things are likely, which one of these things is significant. And if this is going to move forward, how do we manage it to get the best possible outcome for Danville? And that's all I can really help you with today.
Thank you, Jerry. I'm Martha Walker, and I have been privileged to chair this committee with a great group of individuals from the Foundation Board. Now it's your turn. First of all, let me say that everything that you saw today on this presentation, along with a complete report, is available on the Danville Regional Foundation website. So you have access to everything we know. This is not a 2,000-page report. It's 75 pages, and I think it's very readable. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Chris, for doing this work. So now it's your turn. We want to hear what you have to say. We want you to think about the ifs. We want you to think about the opportunities, the challenges, what you hope to hear, the questions that you have. Some of the questions we can answer now. Some of the questions we're going to be writing down, and we will capture that and get that back to you or post it on the website if needed. So we'll try to respond. So I think you've got, look.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Did you do in your study across the country what benefits are paid to casino workers? The type of benefits they have as
You
far
mean
as health?
outside of wages? You mean
Yes, sir.
Healthcare and?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, we looked at that. I mean, it varies across the board and the type of casino. Most of them, if you have a large national operator, they're generally providing some level of benefits, but it also varies based on what state law requires. So there's a lot of it really comes down to what that state is going to sort of say, you have to provide this for these kind of workers.
Thank you, Buddy. Other questions, comments, ifs?
I have a comment and a question. In your talk, much of your talk was about revenues. And to think of a 100-mile radius, it doesn't seem very far. It gave an impression, or I got an impression of Danville, or we get this money, and it's coming from somewhere else, but much of that's coming from us. And my question is, when you spoke of social cost, the $3.2 million, and you spoke of 2,200 people,
Mm-hmm.
what is that money? Who cost is? I don't.
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, that's a tough one. So
And is it the real cost to the?
it's
that,
not.
that doesn't
yeah.
have a dollar value.
Yeah. It's not a cost that is coming directly out of your pocket, unless you're the problem gambler. It's not a direct cost that comes out of the municipal budget or the state budget. It's an estimate of what's the productivity loss to the employer? What does it cost to provide whatever social or health services are needed to that family where there's a gambling addiction? What is the cost related to lost work and bankruptcy and things like that? So it's an estimate of, you could call it soft costs, but in economic circles we call them social costs.
Thank you for your study, very informative. My question is around perception. So when we're looking to recruit talent to the area, young families, when someone's looking from the outside in, thinking about moving to this community and they see a casino located here, did you see any positive, negative, any kind of influence on that decision?
You hit on the one thing that we were tasked to do that we were unable to say anything about. We tried. It's really difficult because you have to have a sense of like, well, what did people think of the community before? How do you find the people who can give you that sense and then the sense after? We looked for national studies, I was even at, any case study would, we didn't really find anything that we felt was informative. And we actually, the steering committee gave us a lot of ideas of things to chase down, and we looked at a number of them, and none of them really, panned out in sort of being able to say how it impacts the reputation. And as we thought about it, so it's not in the report, and a lot of it also comes down to how it's not a blanket change in perception, but it's how you're perceived to different people. So people who want that ritzy, exciting casino-style entertainment and nightlife are going to like it. And they'll probably think, well, Danville's a little more interesting than I thought. People who don't like that, people who are going to call in noise complaints and don't like loud music or, whatever, people who want more quiet country nights are probably going to think, I'm not interested in that in a casino. So, at the end, we sort of felt it's a wash. We didn't know how to really capture that. So, yeah, we didn't put it in the report. Thank you for pointing out the one thing we didn't do. Well, there's probably more than one thing, and we'll find out what it is today.
And yes, we asked for that. We wanted to know what difference. So another question.
I have two questions that came to mind. One is with the possibility that we're more on the lower end for a casino, will we have more part-time jobs than full-time jobs? And the second part of that question is, oh gee, I forgot it. Well, just go with that one. I can't think of the other one now.
If you think of it, you can ask it.
It'll come back.
If it comes back, I'll come back.
Yeah, it is possible that and the numbers we're using are full-time estimates, so that 500 jobs could be 500 full-time jobs, or it could be 1,000 part-time jobs. And a lot of that's going to be the decision of the operator of what they make. So most casinos, though, are full-size commercial casinos are 24/7 operations. They operate 24 hours a day. So you're going to have a lot of full-time workers, but then there will be, some of it part-time. So it's not an all or nothing. It'll be a mix. It'll be a mix of that. Some of that will depend. If you get a large national operator, Caesars or Eldorado or whoever owns them now, they'll probably be more full-time. If you get a smaller regional operator, it's less certain.
So before we go to the next question, Jerry, one of the points about this 24/7 operation we discussed was around the need for child care within facilities, and also for the region to consider that. I don't know if you want to speak to that or not.
Yeah, we had looked at the study that was commissioned on the child care options in Danville. It's not I think we have a footnote on that in the report, that licensed, full service, 24/7 drop-off types of centers are not available in the local area. So if you do have part-time workers who might get called in, hey, so-and-so's sick, can you come in? And there's no drop-off daycare, that's going to be hard for that person. So that's part of the system stuff that has to be taken care of if you get a facility like this for it to be successful.
You said that some of the jobs would be stepped up for some people in similar jobs, like in the hotel industry. Mm-hmm. Do you see this having an impact on wages in other areas, that they have to up their wages to compete? Can you see an impact of that?
It is possible that, if the wages are higher for some industries, there could be more of a competition for that labor pool. And it's really going to depend on the skill set of the workers, really what the pay difference is, and what kind of options they have, and then the personal preferences of the workers. Some people might want to have that. Hey, I need that night shift because my spouse works days, and that'll help us shift this out. Other people might not want to do, they might not be attracted to it because of that night work. So a lot of personal preferences will come into play as well in terms of what it'll really compete with. But at that, you know, $12 or $15 an hour, it's going to be a lot higher than what the accommodation and food services is paying now in Danville. So it'll directly compete with those wages. If they pay higher wages, it could compete with some other businesses and industries.
Thank you, Chair. Go ahead. We'll get this question, then come back here.
Assuming our community would have the opportunity to choose what national company would manage the casino, so assuming we'd have the choice, did your research discover any information about the culture of the different national management companies? And if not, where would you suggest we go to find out more about the cultures of the companies that are running or managing casinos? Okay. Would you go to the community, the employees? That's my question.
Yeah. Okay, that's the second thing we didn't look at in the study. And I was, because we didn't know, you know, what operator, you know, is going to, you know, a bidding process, and, you know, who's going to be bidding, who's going to be selecting. We did see, you know, as we looked at the benchmark communities, because we looked at different operators, we saw some of those differences, but I'm not willing to tag one operator or another one as better or worse based on, you know, looking at 5 or 6 communities. What I would recommend is that be an intensive part of whatever vetting process is employed. And I would hope that the state sets it up as a local process. In some states, it's not. In some states, the state gets to decide. In some places, they mix up the site and operator decisions, and they have it all bound in one, so you wind up with a good operator and a bad site, and a bad operator and a good site. Other cases, it's done separately, so you get to select the site, and you get to select the best site and then the best operator. So it depends on how that process will play out, but you want to have that local vetting process so you can ask those questions. And when you see who's bidding, yeah, I would, you know, Glassdoor has ratings on companies. I would look at that. I would look at what employee lawsuits have been filed against them, and I would look at some of the communities where they operate and ask about how they are as a corporate partner. And if they come in, they should have to do a pitch to the community and be prepared to answer questions like that.
Thank you, Jerry. And I think that really is translated into a hope, and it's part of a system analysis that would be done on anyone that would be interested.
Good morning. In this last election, November the 5th, where we just voted, I think a lot of people have a question in the community. What's the difference in what we just voted on and the casino? Because that's the big question. Because a lot of people think that the pari-mutuel betting and this would be in competition. Just what's the difference?
Yeah. As I understand it, the pari-mutuel is more like a slots parlor. It's an electronic gaming based on historical horse races. And I'm still kind of puzzled as to how it all works. But as I understand it, the races are anonymized. So you have the record of the horses, and you have some of the record of the riders, and you're making a bet based on that information, but the results are predetermined. But it all happens in more of like a video gaming terminal. So it's a little more like a slots parlor. And a full-scale casino would have slots and table games and a host of other types of, you know, betting. So you'd have your poker and roulette wheels, and slots machines, and more of a full range of gaming options. So as I understand it, the referendum just approved the pari-mutuel, not the full scale.
That's right. It's two separate things.
Over here, Martha.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. And then James will.
During the course of your study, there were 2 or 3 other studies going on at the same time that have come out since.
Yeah.
And several of the assumptions in your study are similar or slightly different, but can you give us your thoughts on 3 of the assumptions? You're basically including a 100-mile radius, and several studies indicate 2.5-hour radius. Particularly, that's important to the southeast of Danville. Could you, give us your thoughts on that, as well as the JLARC study coming out with a 27% gaming tax recommendation, and also the 300 million. One of the study Danville had was the 300 million range revenue, which is the larger size in your study. Can you just give us your thoughts on those 3?
Yeah, and like I said, those were coming out as we were finishing. We haven't had a lot of time to review them in depth. I've scanned them, so I don't, feel qualified to talk in depth about them, but we did look at how do our assumptions compare. We were a little more conservative in our assumptions compared to the city study, but we're still within the range. I think their low end was around 240 million, and they went up to, a higher than we did. We had the 50 to 300. So, but we also came out similar in terms of the revenue we estimated. Their total estimate was a little bit higher than ours, but we were pretty close on some of the gaming and the non-related taxes. So I think those are pretty reasonable. The JLARC study estimated a $190 million casino, which is in the mid-range of what we did. I felt like we were looking really at what's the range of possibility. We weren't trying to predict how big or how successful will it be, because we don't know the site, we don't know the operator, we don't know so many things. We thought, we just want to stick with, hey, if you get a casino that's only this big, is that worth it? Or does it only make sense if you get the big successful 300 million plus? To me, that's the hard, you want to have that test case. If it makes sense at the low end, then it should make sense at the high end. But if it only makes sense if everything goes right, that's a riskier proposition. So that was sort of why we framed that out. The 100-mile versus the 2.5. Yeah, I mean, there have been some different standards used in different studies. We did the 100-mile, and that's what we chose and went with. There's a lot of studies show that that's the core market area. That wouldn't be the only draw area, but that would be the core market area you have to draw from. You're going to have, as you get further away, that has less of an attraction to, come here, and then there's all the other casinos people might go to. So we sort of felt that 100 miles was the core market. I'm not sure, did I answer all of your questions? Okay.
And don't forget the 27%.
Oh,
your thoughts?
I knew there was, yeah.
You're welcome.
I mean, the 27% would put, Virginia into the range of the benchmark states. They were like 23% to 27%. So they'd be at that low end, but they'd be there, which was much better than, like we had done 10 and 15%. But if they say 0% for the host community, you get 0 gaming taxes, and all you get would be the real estate and the sales, lodging, and all that taxes. And their estimate actually came out pretty close to ours as well. I think it was 4 to 4.5 million. We were in that 3 to 5 million range for those related revenues.
And both of those studies, is the city study available, Ken, on your website? Yes. Great. And the JLARC study is also available on the JLARC website.
Yeah, you guys now have 3 75-plus page casino studies that you can review over the holidays and really enjoy.
Aren't you excited?
And dig into.
James?
Yes. In your comparison communities, did you see any significant population change because of the impact of the casinos?
And this is in the full report. There were mixed impacts. Some of the casino communities were growing, some were not. Some had job growth, some did not. We also looked at the job growth right in proximity to the casino, so within like a 1.5-mile area, so that sort of immediate neighborhood district. And again, the results were mixed. We saw some job growth in some of them. We saw a decline in others. In the Shelbyville casino, there was job growth, but the only facilities, that was an isolated facility. The only things within 1.5 miles were the casino and the airport. So it didn't really have any spillover benefits. Dubuque was also an interesting case because in one of the casinos, and they're located fairly close to each other, there was growth in the surrounding area, but the other casino, also in Dubuque, not very far away, that surrounding area did not have job growth. But they've also suffered from flooding, and we don't know if any of that was due to floods that might have been happening. So we saw very mixed impacts, and that's really where we look at where is it located, how is it designed to interact with the rest of the community, is it isolated, is it separated by a river or infrastructure, or is it really located 2 miles out of town? So we saw a range of those different impacts. And in the one community, Monticello, and we had actually, that was one of the communities that we had worked in before we had done an economic development plan for the village of Monticello, and the casino was a part of that. After we finished our plan, Empire Resorts built a new casino outside of Monticello, and they closed the Monticello casino. And that just happened in 2019. So in that case, you had no job growth in Monticello, and then the casino has closed, and now it's made it even worse.
So we have 4 questions, 4 individuals who have questions lined up, and that's probably going to take us to our time limit. So if you have additional questions, comments, hopes, if statements, please let us know, write them down, share them, see us afterwards, and we will capture that. So let's start with our last 4.
Yes, 2 questions. One, thank you, sir, for your presentation today. Number 1 is in reference to new entrepreneurs or spin-offs from the casinos. How did that look? And minority contracts, what percentage were offered to minorities? Not jobs, but contracts.
Yeah. And that varies from state to state, municipality to municipality. A lot of places don't have any requirement for minority contracting. And in most of the cases, it's not a reporting requirement in the state gaming reports. So it's really hard to track how much that's happening and whether that's happening. It also varied a bit with the location of the casino in some of the different markets. At the Shelbyville in Indiana had no minority contracting, but no minority population. So there's a mixed bag in terms of what we could see there. But in most cases, we really couldn't get the information, and the casinos weren't coughing it up.
More of an FYI, my son-in-law is an attorney, federal attorney in Memphis, and among his areas he covers is Louisiana, New Orleans, Mobile, Shreveport. All these have casinos, and he mediates controversies. All these big-name casino operators are unionized, so I'm speaking to the benefits. They will have benefits. The dealers have a union, the pit bosses have a union, the service workers have a union. Now, I know Virginia's a right-to-work law, but they can also decide to get a union once they get here. So odds are these people will have good benefits. Secondly, the Bristol, I'm from Southwest Virginia. It is very difficult to get there from here. You got to go over a large mountain chain. I doubt there's going to be much competition or between competition here in the Bristol casinos. We might get some from Norfolk and Portsmouth and Richmond, but seriously doubt there's going to be many people coming over those mountains to come to the casino here or go vice versa. Just comment.
Thank you, Gary.
Also, thank you for the insightful analysis. It's very helpful to us. I have an observation, not a question. Given the overhang of the North Carolina legislature doing anything, legalizing gambling in that state, obviously a huge element of our potential here would be the fact that North Carolina does not have legalized gambling to any degree. I would urge our city officials and council to be very, very careful if this project should ever come to pass with the allocation of the flow of funds from it, because it may not be a 30-year, 20-year, or even 10-year source of funds with that cloud always out there. And probably the more successful that our project might be would also serve as a greater incentive to the state of North Carolina to legalize gambling. And if a casino were built, say, in central North Carolina, pick Greensboro, for instance, that could provide a very short, useful life for ours. And I just think we need to be careful how we would propose spending the funds flow from this project, given that situation. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. We have one other question or comment. Let me move around this way. Laura, do you have?
Yes, I have one more.
Well, okay, so let's go there, and then we'll go here.
Yeah, thank you. You alluded to it a little bit. You had a slide that kind of talked about the location of the casino, whether it would be kind of isolated out off a highway somewhere, and whether it was embedded more in a hub of activity, and the benefits of that. And of course, if you've seen what we're looking at here in Danville, we have some different options that kind of have that debate. Can you elaborate a little bit more again on the benefits of having one that's kind of in the central hub of activity, and how that is a benefit more to the community versus whether it's out there? And I've read studies on this too that talk about, I think Norfolk's having this discussion right now about theirs, where the casino would do really well if it's kind of out there by itself, but nothing else really benefits, versus if you have it in the middle of that activity.
Yeah, you're kind of answering your own question a little bit, but, you know, and it really depends on, you know, if you can embed it somewhere in the community that can handle the traffic flows, because if people, you know, if you got a spot, you know, that could be a nice active entertainment district, it's got to be able to get the flow of traffic in and out. You know, so that can, if it is too difficult to get in and out, people won't come in, or it'll make life difficult for every other business. And that can be one of the advantages of that highway location. It's easy in and out, and it doesn't create traffic impacts that hurt other businesses, but it also helps increase that draw because people are able to get in there easily. You know, so there's trade-offs in that, you know, whether or not it's embedded. But some of it also just, it comes down to that, you know, it can also be the design. I mean, you could put it in the heart of town, but if the casino's surrounded by a sea of parking and an interchange and other stuff so that, you know, people can't get in and out, you know, it's really gonna, you know, make a difference on that. And that'll really come down to like when you get to that site decision and when they start, you know, putting pen to paper on the design plans. How are people gonna get in and out? What's the potential to have those kind of synergies and spillovers? You know, and since we don't, you know, we don't know what the site might be, we just kind of laid out those range of options. It's an unknown.
So the infrastructure was also a big part of that, but also another part that we discussed was the impact on area businesses. If the casino was self-contained,
yeah,
with hotel, restaurant, and what impact that might have on local businesses. So that's also in the study.
Yeah.
Thank you all, and I'll be brief since I'm the last question. You mentioned Monticello, New York, and it leaving the community. Did you look at other communities that brought a casino in where those casinos did not thrive and study what was the underlying cause that led to their demise?
Yeah. There were some, but it's hard to track When something is closed, if it closed several years ago, like there's no record left of it. So we would have needed to be tracking it a couple of years ago. The places where we found most of the closures were in communities that had multiple casinos. So the state legalized casinos, and they didn't put a limit. They didn't say 5 statewide or 1 per community. So, and this happened in Mississippi and some other places. So they went from 0 to 12 casinos. And then like 4 of them or 5 of them would close. But they didn't lose, but they still had casinos. So those are more cases of not can one casino succeed, but a case of, they overbuilt and then it came back to reality. So we didn't find another case like Monticello, and it really only, they closed the casino in 2019. So the news was just right out there. It had just happened. So it was very recent. They closed it in like February of 2019.
Jerry, thank you for your work. Chris and the team, we're very grateful. It's been a great 6 months. Y'all were wonderful to work with, very detailed, listened carefully to our questions, our concerns, our what-ifs, our maybes, our challenges. You heard us, and I think you have delivered a report that is very readable and very understandable, and hopefully, excuse me, will serve as a good resource for all of you as you're thinking through this process. So let's thank Jerry.
Thank you, Martha.